Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is a channel for educational purposes, and we try to check out and delve deeply into great theories of everything, ancient and modern. Generally obscure theories that you probably haven't heard of, but if you had, or if now that you do, they can benefit you, affecting your life by helping you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today's our 228th video that we've done under the unit of the Reciprocal Church, which shouts out to the Reciprocal System of Theory from Dewey B. Larson, which is, I think, as far as I know, the greatest theory of everything that's out there. I have about 580 some videos on the reciprocal system, both on YouTube and on BitChute. If you want to check those out, it's I go over several of his books, many articles, and some of his associates' work as well. And it's not easy to grasp, but it's easier to grasp that than to try to grasp the disjointed and inconsistent mainstream viewpoints on all these different subjects. But for now, we're using that term for the church, reciprocal church, one over church. And this is an attempt to put together many spiritual resources, weapons of mass creation, things that you can use in your own life to bring out that feeling of reverence, being in touch with the divine, that creative spark. And we feel like this is necessary because of the impending destruction of the Western religions, especially. In particular, we're looking at the New Testament today, again, and how mainly the thesis that the New Testament is an invention of the Romans, and Jesus' story is fictional, possibly an amalgamation based on true things that happened, but in general designed as by the Romans as a piece of wartime propaganda against the Jews, who were they fighting in a war that lasted really a couple hundred years off and on, but especially the Jewish war from 66 to 73, 74 AD. And they backdated the story of Jesus so that the prophecies of Jesus would come true in the book by Josephus called Wars of the Jews, set in at that war between the Romans and the Jews. The two generals involved were Vespasian and Titus, who eventually both became emperors. And so the things that were predicted by Jesus in the Gospels are fulfilled by either Titus or Vespasian in Josephus's work called Wars of the Jews. However, there are also parallels that go the other way, where the Gospels are parodying or paralleling the Jewish war from Josephus. And so the conclusion is that they were both written by the same source, known as Josephus, although there's a lot of suggestion to indicate that Josephus never existed, but was a pen name of possibly Arius Piso, who was a very powerful noble that kind of existed as a shadow emperor for quite a few different emperors, including Vespasian and Titus, but also possibly Trajan, in a later period from 98 to 117, and even possibly Nerva before him from 96 to 98 AD. I don't know about any of the emperors before that, before Vespasian. But anyway, we're looking at the work of Michael Menescot's, his book called Christianity's Origins, a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And this book just came out in October, and he runs with this thesis of the Roman provenance of the New Testament. And he attempts to demonstrate that this is a fact by graphing the book of Luke, 24 chapters, with the Jewish War by Josephus, 694 chapters, or 694 paragraphs. And, you know, he plots Luke on the vertical axis and Josephus on the horizontal axis, and all of the points of parallel, he puts a dot. And then at the end, he looks and sees what he has. Or, you know, theoretically, he probably looked and saw many times while he was plotting the points, but he finds approximately 250 parallels between Wars of the Jews and the book of Luke. So 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. And I'm pretty sure there are some that he didn't find also. In an attempt to kind of decode the New Testament, we're kind of looking at how he's decoded the book of Luke in particular, and all these parallels. We're trying to kind of granularly go over all of these parallels that he finds, and to see, you know, what is the nature of these parallels, how clear are they? You know, does it look like he's cherry picking stuff or just kind of making stuff up, or are these like pretty obvious parallels? And I mean, I think that many of them are obvious, but some of them are hidden. Some of them are, you know, require some background knowledge, and he brings in a few other texts in order to achieve that, to find that. And some of them, you can find them if you're looking for them. But if you're not looking for them, you wouldn't suspect that they're there. And then some of them, you can't even find them if you're looking for them. But when they're pointed out to you, you're like, oh my gosh, it's right there. There was one just a paragraph that had like 6 or 7 different parallels in them between the two books. But they're woven into the script so well that you hardly can pick them out until they're pointed out to you. So, and then they become obvious. But, what I'm basically saying is that whoever put together both of these books used a great deal of care and has a great deal of skill as a writer, and has an incredible amount of background knowledge that they're bringing to bear, including a full knowledge of the Old Testament, and a lot of knowledge of, you know, Roman politics and, you know, just kind of the way things went in Palestine or Galilee at this time, Judea, and yeah, just a great ability to kind of layer a text with many different layers of meaning. Because a lot of the parallels that Joseph Atwill found in his book, Caesar's Messiah, you know, some of the other authors have never found them. And so there's probably, at this point, I can identify maybe 10 different authors, 10 different historical authors who have made this thesis about a Roman provenance of the New Testament. And they run the gamut. Many of them are, old, but there also is the literature aspect of it. Many of the classic authors of, the past, especially the past 400 or so years, they knew the deal about this stuff as well. They knew who wrote the New Testament, and they wrote about it in their works, particularly William Shakespeare. Joseph Atwill argues that every one of Shakespeare's plays is about the Roman provenance of the New Testament. And it's an attempt to reverse the kind of the mockery, because not only are these like parodies or satires, they're really insults and mockeries given to the Jews, but also just the hoi polloi, the Gentiles living in the Roman Empire at this time. This really shows what the Roman elite actually thought of the average person, and but not until you kind of break their code and understand what they're talking about. Now, there are other authors such as James Ballantyne Hannay, who taught at Oxford in the early 20th century. In one of his books from about 100 years ago, he basically maintains that the entire New Testament is more or less pornography, that if you know what the code is, you can see that they're talking about a whole lot of orgies, and that was really the basis of the Christian church, as well as the Jewish temple. That was where they got their money from, being a house of prostitution, and that there were all of these little rooms that you could take your Vestal Virgin or your nun, or if you were so inclined, your boy, into these rooms, and that it was all part of the process. And that's what the texts actually talk about. Roman Piso has the same idea. He has a list of probably 150 dirty jokes that are in the New Testament. You just have to kind of know what the code is. I don't think that that's what it's all about, but I just think that that's one of the layers. There are so many different layers of it. There's an astronomical layer or astrological layer. There is, a layer of a geographical layer. There's a psychedelic drug layer. If you look at John Marco Allegro's book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, and he uses the same kind of linguistic data. It comes to pretty similar conclusions as Hannay does. And these people are like eminent scholars. They're not like conspiracy theorists, so-called. I am a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not an eminent scholar, but I am a scholar. And so, these aren't like lightweights coming up with this stuff. He also refers to the Encyclopedia Biblica, which was an encyclopedia of the Bible. Like, all of the proper names in the Bible and all the concepts in the Bible are in this encyclopedia that was compiled in the late 19th century. And Hannay, who knew some of these people, but definitely used their work in his books, says that they all knew that the Romans wrote the New Testament, but they couldn't really say it out loud. But they referred to it over and over again in this Encyclopedia Biblica, which was then pretty much banned in England at the time. And Hannay's work didn't get the kind of play that it would have had he been writing about more conventional topics, or more palatable topics. But so this is not, and I mean, to me, the thesis is utterly obvious. Again, once it's pointed out to you, the Romans had the motive, the means, the opportunity, and the method to do this. And nobody else did, including the people who were claimed to have written it. You know, the Matthews, the Marks, and the Lukes, and the Johns, who claimed to have written the Gospels, were in a much worse position to have done so than the Romans were, and particularly when you consider that the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament are written in Greek. Jesus, had he actually existed, would have spoken Aramaic, as well as all of these disciples, and among Jews, it wasn't that common that you would be able to speak Greek, much less write in it. But for the Romans, it was, you know, kind of still the lingua franca, as Latin was coming in. But only the most elite Jews were Hellenized, so to speak. Okay, sorry to go off on that tangent there, but we're going to start here with Menescot's, the author of this Christianity's Origins book, talking about his graph and why he chose, or, you know, plotting these points. He says, there is nothing difficult about this. I'm simply plotting the locations of each parallel. Although it was very uncommon technique at the time, it was certainly well known to the Roman government. And we know this thanks to, sorry, time to turn the page. We know this thanks to the famous Hipparchus, who built on the teachings of the Chaldeans and demonstrated plotting the stars of the firmament on a 2D chart 2 centuries earlier. Okay, so this whole plotting of points was already 200 years old at this time, so the Romans did have the ability to do this. As I will explain later, it's quite likely that the APTVS pattern, which is the pattern that is formed when you plot the Book of Luke and you cross it with the Wars of the Jews by Josephus. The APTVS pattern was constructed to have the appearance of the stars of the firmament arranged into a message, a constellation spanning the heavens. An illustration of the intended effect is shown below, as I will explain later. And it's just the same APTVS pattern, but it's like that you see in the thumbnail, but now it's on a black background with, you know, stars instead of just dots there, but it's still the same pattern. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple stray dots there, but there's actually more stray dots in the star pattern than there are in the other pattern. The vast majority of the dots fit the pattern. Probably all but 5 or 10 of them. Okay. It's likely that the anomalous group of parallels between the T and the V, okay, except for those that we already dealt with, where he moved the V up, because they're all referred to in Luke 24, even though they're also referred to in Luke's 4 through 6. And so he kind of chose to plot the points up in Luke 24. kind of the left side of the V. Whereas before they were down on the bottom of the V and kind of not in a meaningful place. So he explained that. I explained that from him about 3 episodes ago. So it's likely that the anomalous group of parallels between T and V was either intended to be depicted instead at the top of the chart, or else not intended to be part of the APTVS pattern. Let's see, the caption says an illustration of the message written in the stars. It might have been the intended visual impression when presented to the initiates of the top tier of the secrecy cult. Again, he uses this Flavian secrecy cult kind of like the Mithraism at the time, which is, there's kind of like the Masons. There are steps of initiation. So the first step is to see Jesus as this heroic figure. And then the next step is to see Jesus as the Lord. And then the next step is to recognize that, well, Jesus is actually prophesying his second coming, and his second coming is Titus. So you can see Jesus as the Lord, but the real, more prominent Lord is Titus. And then eventually, at the last step, you are shown that actually the story about Jesus is actually totally fictional, and so you need to worship the emperor purely. Okay. Yeah, so he moved these things up to Luke 24 and some background stars added to it. Okay, with this in mind, this historical link between plotting in 2 dimensions and the Chaldean astronomy tradition helps explain why the Slavonic version of Jewish war, the one that was translated by the Slavs, describes astronomers descended from the Chaldeans, showing Herod the joyous star that had a meaning, and star in quotes, and so is meaning, and that would lead them to the baby Jesus, as well as why the text permits an interpretation in which the star was actually a constellation, and indeed why, when Herod saw this star, he worshipped God. But I digress. My goal is to describe the sequences of parallels. Next is the story of Jesus healing a slave. Okay, so we're going to Jewish War, paragraph 496. That's book 4, chapter 6, paragraph 2. And you can find the Whiston translation of Josephus online and download it if you want to follow along. It's usually called the Complete Works of Josephus. I haven't looked at the Slavonic version, but the Complete Works of Josephus. And so you can get out your Bible and you can watch these different parallels and you can judge them for yourself. So here in paragraph 496 says Vespasian tells his Roman commanders they do not even need to enter Jerusalem, also known as the Holy House. I don't know, that seems to be a stretch. Jerusalem, maybe the temple would be the Holy House, but it just says they do not even need to enter Jerusalem. So he's stretching it a bit there. Since God is acting as a Roman commander, making the Jews kill each other. So God is doing just as well as the Roman soldiers would be doing because he's making the Jews kill each other. The occupants are described as sick, the Jews, The occupants are described as sick, afflicted with a distemper, and dying. They're described as sick. They are dead, supposedly by God's power, without him needing to enter this house, and have just been described earlier, about 18 paragraphs earlier, as being urged to accept being slaves to Romans. So Josephus talks about how, they have just been described as being urged to accept being slaves to the Romans. Like, you're going to lose this, so you might as well accept that you're going to become a slave. And I believe that's a lot of Jews fought to the death as a result. Now, if we find the parallel here in Luke chapter 7, verse 1, Jesus responds to a request to heal the slave of a I don't know what this word is, but it's similar to a Roman commander, not a centurion, but some type of Roman military commander. So Jesus responds to heal the request, to heal the slave of this commander who is sick and dying. But Jesus ends up healing the occupant without even going into the house. He has via God's power in the parentheses. The Roman centurion compares himself to Jesus. It then declared him, the Roman centurion, as being the greatest faith in all Israel. Now, I find a lot of importance in that verse there, because it very strongly is very strong evidence, I think, or at least good evidence that the Romans wrote this. Even the Roman centurion has the greatest faith in all Israel. It shows how anti-Jewish Jesus is, and how pro-Roman Jesus is. But as far as lining up with these parallels, again, the themes are in there. You don't need to even enter the house. The Jews are killing each other. There's some element of faith that's thrown in there. There's a sick person, an afflicted person or people. So it's not a strong parallel, but it is it's kind of tight, and it's also it's something that you can see if it's pointed out to you. It's not that strong, but they didn't want to make it obvious. They didn't want this to be discovered in their lifetime. I don't think that they would have thought that it was going to last for almost 2,000 years, but they wanted it to last for a little while. Okay, that can be determined, especially if you read some of the letters that Pliny the Younger wrote to Arius Piso, or to Emperor Trajan, who may have been also Arius Piso. They talk about wanting to have immortal fame, and that's how they would live on. But they also, kind of indicated that eventually they knew that it was going to be recognized. Okay, back to the text. That single paragraph is parodied by an extremely short section of Luke, but the parallels are quite extensive. 1. There were occupants of a house who are equated with being a slave to Romans. 2. They are suggested to be sick and also dying, and so he ends up healing their implied sickness. 3. He does this, now he either being, I guess, Titus or Jesus, or Vespasian and Jesus. He does this without even needing to go inside the house, thanks to the power of a god. And God or divinity is implied as residing in the form of a Roman military leader. Because the centurion had the faith greater than all of Israel. Okay, so those 4 parallels are bound up in that those 2 passages. You know, given that all of that is only good for 1 dot, I would say that's worth 1 dot. I wouldn't give it a bunch of dots, but I would give it 1 dot. Let's see if that's what he does. In the footnote, he says, well, the Slavonic translation is available for Brill for 1/10 of the cost of the book of the book. Oh, I see. You can get the translation itself. I don't know. Okay, he says, if a parallel occurs, say, halfway through a chapter, like Luke 1, verse 40, I accordingly plot it at the halfway point, like so it would be like 1.5. This is not the, you know, super accurate. This is not the approach that could be adopted, but I think this is the fairest, especially since in the 1st century AD, the verses did not yet have an extensive numbering. Having tried all alternative approaches that I could think of, I can confirm that the choice has almost no visibly discernible effect on the final pattern. He also paraphrases Joseph Atwill from Caesar's Messiah or Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. Oh, well, I believe we're out of time just here, so we'll get into that paraphrase tomorrow. I know we're going slow, but we're trying to examine all of these parallels. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.